All right, we'll return to Teddy Roosevelt here for part two to start us. One thing I jotted down while I was waiting for the last video to upload is that not only does he discuss protection, if we want to look at an overview of Teddy Roosevelt, we might want to see this as well, that there's probably less negative commentary on civilization and on modern ways of living in the late 19th, early 20th century than Thoreau had. Thoreau, we know, commented on this a lot and saw us as confused and busy and perhaps not really progressing. Nature is always there doing its long, slow thing and it will overtake any human creations at some point, even though he doesn't say that directly in the readings we saw. We don't see that type of thinking happening in Teddy Roosevelt. We might ask, does Roosevelt see the potential negative effects of humans on nature? And now we have another layer to look at, say the bluebird's loss was like an old friend. He doesn't really regret it. It seems like he's not talking about extinction necessarily, but he's not horribly upset about the rather large ecological changes that brought about this loss, at least for a few years in the reading, right? And so he doesn't seem to, the early signs are he doesn't have an ecological mindset. He likes these things there. He likes nature. He likes being in nature. He was a hunter. He's comfortable there. But he doesn't seem to be having a lot of negative commentary on the effects of humans or any fears just over the loss of changes to ecological systems, right? He also says a disappearing species is like the loss of a writer's greatest works, but we could lose a writer's greatest works and still have a functional ecology, even a functional culture, right? And so the things he's comparing it to move him away from some of the biological thinking or ecological thinking that we might start to see, and we'll start to see in Leopold, right? So that's what we might say about some of these comparisons when he is at his saddest, right? He's also giving himself away and giving his views away, that he's not thinking about this ecologically quite yet. Off from there, in that one, you've got some other notes basically saying what I just said. Let's switch to Burroughs letter right here. This one, too, I think really is a nice extension of what I said. Notice this is where the bear catches his paw in the can. And so we might look at this, too. Is there any... How does he like nature? And is there any sort of condemnation of modern ways of living like we saw in Thoreau? It seems to me not, right? I'm sure if you asked yourself the same question, you caught that. Right away in the first line, he says, I think there's nothing more amusing and interesting than the development of changes made in the wild beast character. But what is amusing and interesting? The bear getting his paw caught in the tin can, right? And then needing people's help. So he also says along the way, there's lots of tin cans in the garbage heaps, and that's why the bears keep getting their paws caught in the cans. But he never says that's bad, right? There's no regret here. He doesn't say, oh, we got to get rid of these garbage heaps, or, oh, no, we're changing the environment. In fact, what it becomes is sort of an amusing or interesting story to tell people. And so most people, I think in the modern age, we would be a lot more upset about this type of thing happening. We'd be thinking, oh no, what if there weren't people there to help the bears? Oh, these bears don't have functional paws. Now, how are they going to live? How are they going to raise their young? How are they going to hunt? Right? And so we don't see him moving into ecological thinking. And this is kind of what was going on with a lot of nature writing, not all nature writing, but a lot of nature writing around the turn of the century as the 1900s. The 1800s became the 1900s, is there was a lot of interesting, funny nature stories that are still in many ways anthropocentric. That is, that whatever's going wrong in nature can be made into an interesting story for people. And in fact, we can see maybe better evidence of that even down here when he's thinking about how men used to be explorers in the wild, right? And go out and do these types of, adventurous, exploratory things and be out in the rawness of nature, maybe the hard pastoral of nature, doing dangerous things, even conquering nature. And now they've been turned into people who are simply taking the tin cans off of bear paws. So right at the moment to close out his thinking, when he could say, all these trash heaps are bad for the environment. It's also bad for the wildlife. There's some endangerment or crisis going on here. We should stop this. Instead, he doesn't even think about the animals or nature. He thinks about changes to the types of adventure that humans or men can undertake, right? And so we can see he's not really an environmentalist in some ways. He's a preservationist or a conservationist, but he's not thinking ecologically. Nature is still serving human needs, and he thinks about humans an awful lot when he notes what is a very early environmental problem, these trash heaps in the park, right? We talk about speech at the Grand Canyon. I want to save time for Leopold as well. So we're going to go through some kind of quick and just go over my notes, and you can find what you need in here. What do we see here? This is a little bit different piece for Roosevelt. We see a practical use of nature, which is a very Roosevelt thing to do, right? We hunt in nature, but also we can farm and have agriculture. And so we see the irrigation and the progress of civilization there. So we can see he's not anti-civilization. In fact, he's building civilization out in the desert, right? But we also see the appreciation for it. If there's a moment where he is sort of anti-civilization, or at least he's a preservationist or conservationist, it's in this paragraph here, which I really, really like. He's delighted to learn the wisdom of the Santa Fe Railroad people in deciding to not build their hotel on the brink of the canyon. They won't be building a summer cottage or anything of any kind that might mar the wonderful grandeur, the sublimity, there's our word, right, of the beauty of the canyon. So we can see he doesn't want all progress there. He wants nature to remain sublime, maybe beautiful, maybe intact in some way. But we know from the previous readings, he's not quite getting the ecological big picture quite yet. Another thing he does on the next page is he discusses Native Americans, and he makes a few claims that the eastern U.S. and white civilization has harmed Native Americans and mistreated them. So this is another early negative reading of civilization, and something we don't see much of in Roosevelt. So he is maybe breaking with the common thought of the time here, which is good to see. However, he doesn't describe them as needing protection. They simply need a square deal the way all people do. And what is a square deal? You could study the politics of Roosevelt in detail to see what that means. What we might say here is that they're not being treated as an excluded minority or a group of people that has a lot of political weight set against them and that is struggling. So he's noting the problem, but is he solving it, or will it be solved while he's president? Not really, right? But so that's a good reading of Teddy Roosevelt. If we look at him on the grid real quick, he and his writing don't have the energy of Thoreau. He seems to work from a paradigm where civilization and the environment can coexist, and there's not going to be much of a problem. One thing I really like is Roosevelt really breaks down these two different sides of the debate. Like, basically, Thoreau came in as all of these things, but we really can't put Roosevelt on one side or the other of these qualities. While he sort of seems to be pro-civilization and makes cultural references in that first letter when describing what nature is, and he's pro-progress, he also in some ways is an anti-modern when he doesn't want hotels in the Grand Canyon. He recognizes Native American cultures. So Roosevelt is like halfway in between these, which is a really, really fascinating place to be. And so that's a good way to read him. And also then, this is a good way to read other writers for a course. You can see some people like Thoreau way on one side of this, are for these and against these. We might have other people read that are basically these are their values and they're against these. Roosevelt shoots the gap between some of these. He's some of these things and some of these things at times too. And that's an interesting place to be, and that's what I want you seeing in the course, is that some people will be sort of a mixture of these values, and that's the big picture goal of the course. So again, to round out Roosevelt, he and his writing don't have the energy of Thoreau, and he doesn't seem to condemn civilization quite as much for Thoreau. He's a mixture of those different values. Seems to work from a paradigm where civilization and the environment can coexist, which is very, very different than we'll see in Leopold and Silent Spring by the 1960s, right? So let's talk about Leopold, Aldo Leopold, Thinking Like a Mountain. You've got a brief bio here. He worked for the state of Wisconsin as an ecological scientist, really influenced his views of ecology. This was written, it actually came out after the year of his death. The thinking that goes into this would have been throughout the 30s, but it was by his 40s when he was doing a lot of his famous writing, including his most famous book, Sand County Almanac. The big question here is, what does Thinking Like a Mountain mean? And again, I'll take you through the notes, try to guide you through some of the reading, but we'll go through the notes so you can kind of get an interpretation of this that works for our course. So paragraph 1, we have the animal cry. Why does he say that it's defiant, right? An outburst of wild, defiant sorrow and of contempt for all the adversities of the world. Is it defiant against human progress? That would seem to be one easy reading of this. Is it defiant because it defies any sort of human ambitions? The environment is the long term, and therefore the environment will always defy anything that comes up against it, right? That's the power of nature. All else is short term and cannot overpower it. That'd be a good early reading of what's going on here. Maybe we could see it other ways as well, but that would certainly make sense. So maybe here's a small caveat that comes up in here. Humankind can misuse nature, right? And we know that basically this is written as a story where he goes hunting. By the next page, after the page you can currently see, he kills the wolf mother, and then he learns something about ecology. That's his moment of conversion in what is a literary piece, right? Literary pieces oftentimes are about conversion, and he undergoes an environmental conversion, but kind of a spiritual conversion too. And so we can see that coming up. This is really about the misuse of nature, of not thinking like a mountain. So what's he doing in paragraphs 2 and 3 that's worth talking about and looking at? Nature has a hidden meaning. He said, those unable to decipher the hidden meaning know nonetheless that it is there. So this is closer to Thoreau than Roosevelt, clearly, right? Nature is mystical. It's distant from Roosevelt, who seemed to be a casual observer and didn't seem to feel any mystery of nature inside of him, and in fact could laugh at bear paws getting caught in cans. I don't think that Leopold would laugh at that, right? We're also seeing in paragraph 2 and 3 that nature is a system of signs. The signs reveal the existence of the mystery, yet the mystery is always there. We can't solve it. That's why it's a mystery, right? We just get these signs of it. Leopold never really defines the mystery for us. Instead, by the end, what we get is sort of an ecological view of thinking like a mountain. That is what is revealed to us. So we have to ask ourselves, what exactly is nature to us, or what should it be in terms of how humans live with it? We probably learn more how to treat it by the end of this, right? Not over hunting in any way or disturbing the ecological system for human reasons. Right at the top of the next page, paragraphs 4 through 6, we see the story of the wolf mother. The hunt begins. We see his old self, his old values. We see in paragraph 6 the moment of his conversion, right? The fierce green fire. This is a very, very famous line. There's actually a really great environmental documentary called The Fierce Green Fire that came out a few years ago. That's worth watching. And so we see this, and this is his moment when he learns about the true power of nature. And then we start to get, soon after that, commentary on how humans treat nature, policies, and the basic thought of hunters, or the basic thought of civilization, or those, I think if we say hunters are supposed to be in touch with nature, and Roosevelt certainly thought he was, we're starting to get a view that hunters may even misunderstand ecology, at least at the time, right? I think policies are probably different now in the modern age, but we can see the thinking of the early 20th century, and Leopold is teaching us something in the 40s. And he basically says, the thought pattern used to be less wolves equal more deer. Hey, that sounds great. There's going to be a deer everywhere for hunting. But what does he realize? That wolfless mountains equal too large of a deer population, and the death of the mountain ecology. All these deer are eating everything and ruining not just the mountain, but the other plants. And so the whole ecology is imbalanced and falls apart. And so this is his big takeaway. It really is an ecological essay. And he has these good examples, the simple examples of thinking like a mountain. So what does it mean to think like a mountain in the end? Well, it means that you can't remove anything from the system, or the system falls apart, or at least the system changes and must adapt, right, as nature does. Nature is always self-adapting. That's a staple of ecology, right? But that we don't want to necessarily remove something. Notice what he does toward the end of this, and that is that he mentions hunters and he mentions agriculture down here, also with the cows, the cowman who cleans his range of wolves. So he's looking at very, very practical uses of nature, basically hunters and farmers, right? And so those are his examples of people that we would expect to be in touch with nature, but rather are out of touch with nature to some degree. Best example of ecological thinking. You can take a look at my notes here. I'm running low on time. Importantly, in terms of this being literature, we feel sorry for the wolf mother, and that is his moment of conversion. This is a conversion narrative, right? We also see the personification of the mountain. The mountain is alive. Nature is alive in this. It's not something to be looked at like Thoreau says, even though Thoreau oftentimes treats it as alive as well. And certainly different than Roosevelt. Last thing I might point out here, I'll put this on the screen. The essay closes with this line: "We all strive for safety, prosperity, comfort, long life, and dullness." The short-term goals of people to make themselves safe, this is what he's saying, can interfere with long-term ecological thinking and goals. The last thing I'll point out and leave you with is we now have this nice chronology of Thoreau through Roosevelt through Leopold. Here's our ecological thinking, and then